There's a number inside a government formula that is silently shaping the retirement of tens of millions of Americans right now, and almost nobody is talking about it. Not your financial advisor, not your HR department, not the mainstream news cycle that is too busy covering market swings and political theater to stop and tell you something that could genuinely change the trajectory of your financial life. This number is not a password. It is not a secret tax rate hidden in the fine print. It is embedded inside a formula that the Social Security Administration uses every single day to calculate exactly how much money you will receive for the rest of your life. And the terrifying part is this. Most Americans who are approaching retirement have no idea it even exists. They walk into the SSA office, or they log in online, and they accept whatever number appears on that screen as if it were handed down from some kind of financial authority, as if it is fixed, as if it is fair, as if it is final. But it is not final, and it is not entirely fair. And the moment you understand what is really happening inside that calculation, the moment you see the machinery behind the curtain, you will never look at your Social Security benefit the same way again. So let us begin where almost nobody begins. Not with the age question, not with the debate about whether to claim early or late, not with the political noise about whether Social Security is going to survive or collapse. Let us begin with the actual formula. Because if you do not understand the formula, then every other decision you make about Social Security is built on sand. The Social Security Administration does not simply look at your paycheck history and write you a check that reflects what you earned. It does not take your salary and multiply it by some straightforward percentage and call it a day. The process is far more layered than that, and buried within that process is a mechanism called the primary insurance amount, your PIA, and two specific numbers known as Ben points. These are the numbers that determine the foundation of your benefit. Everything else, your claiming age, your spousal benefits, your cost of living adjustments, all of it is built on top of this foundation. And if the foundation is lower than it should be, every dollar stacked on top of it is lower too. This is not a metaphor. This is math. And the math has consequences that play out over decades of your life. Here is how it works. The SSA begins by examining your work history, specifically your 35 highest earning years. Not all your years, not your average, across your career. Your 35 highest. It adjusts those earnings for inflation and then divides the total by 420, which is the number of months in 35 years, producing what is called your average indexed monthly earnings, or AME. That single number, your AME, is then fed into the formula. And here is where the Ben points enter the picture. Think of Ben points the way most people understand tax brackets, except operating in reverse. Instead of determining how much you owe, they determine how much you receive, and they do it at sharply declining rates. For 2026, the Social Security formula works like this. The SSA multiplies the first $1,286 of your AME by 90%, then multiplies any amount between $1,286 and $7,149 by 32%, and then multiplies anything above $7,149 by just 15%. Read that again. 90% on the first bracket, 32% on the middle bracket, 15% on the top. The drop from that first bracket to the second is not a gentle slope. It is a cliff. And most working Americans in this country land squarely in the middle bracket, which means they are receiving just 32 cents of benefit for every dollar of average indexed monthly earnings in the largest portion of their calculation. But here is where it gets worse. Most people fall in between the two Ben points, which in 2026 equates to average annual earnings between $15,432 and $92,988. If that is you, you will find a significantly lower portion of your income replaced by Social Security than you might have assumed. The system was designed this way intentionally. It is progressive, meaning it protects low earners more than high earners. But the consequence of that design is that the vast majority of middle-class workers, people who worked hard their entire lives, paid into the system every paycheck, never missed a year, and built careers that fall squarely in the middle of the American income spectrum, those people receive a replacement rate that most financial experts consider dangerously insufficient on its own. Think about what that means for a real person. Someone who averaged $60,000 a year over their working life, who did everything right, who contributed faithfully to Social Security for 35 years, lands with an AME somewhere around $5,000 per month. When that number enters the formula, the first $1,286 earns 90%, generating roughly $457. The remaining $3,114 earns 32%, generating about $1,488. Their total primary insurance amount lands around $2,345 per month. Their replacement rate on a $60,000 salary is roughly 47%. Financial planning standards generally recommend replacing at least 70 to 80% of pre-retirement income. The math does not lie. Social Security was never designed to be your entire retirement. It was designed to be a floor. And the bend points define exactly where that floor is. And this is where everything changes. Because the bend points are not static. These bend points increase annually with the average wage index. Every year, the SSA recalculates them based on national wage growth data. The bend points used to calculate your benefit are locked in at the values that existed in the year you turned 62, regardless of when you actually file. So the year you turn 62 is not just a birthday. It is the year your personal bend point formula gets frozen. The cohort you belong to, defined by your 62nd birthday, determines which version of the formula applies to you for the rest of your life. This is a detail so obscure, so buried in actuarial language, that most people reaching retirement age have never heard of it. They walked past this mechanism their entire working lives without realizing it was quietly ticking in the background, gradually shaping the number that would eventually arrive in their mailbox every month. Now let us talk about something even more devastating, something that financial planners call the 0-year problem, and that the SSA documents in a single bland sentence that nobody reads. The SSA selects your 35 highest years of indexed covered earnings. If you worked 40 years, it uses the best 35. If you worked only 30 years, it inserts 5 zeros. Those zeros drag down your average significantly. This is one of the most consequential and least understood features of the entire Social Security system. If you took time off to raise children, if you went back to school in your 30s, if you had a period of illness or unemployment that kept you out of the workforce, if you started your career late, every single one of those gaps, if they push you below 35 years of meaningful earnings, gets replaced by a 0 in the calculation. And that 0 gets averaged into the same formula as your highest earning years. It pulls your AME down. It shifts you deeper into the 32% bracket, and it quietly reduces your benefit for every month of the rest of your life. Here is a number that puts it in concrete terms. A worker with only 30 covered years has 5 zeros pulling down their AME. Adding just 1 year of $50,000 in earnings eliminates 1 zero and raises the AME by approximately $119 per month, which translates to roughly a $38 per month PIA increase before claiming age adjustments. $38 a month sounds small in isolation, but multiply that by 12 months. Multiply it by 20 years of retirement. That is more than $9,000 in additional lifetime benefits from a single year of additional work. And most people making the decision to retire early never run this calculation. They look at their projected benefit on the SSA website, they feel a combination of relief and resignation, and they move forward without ever asking whether that number could be higher. But here's the part that the mainstream conversation almost never reaches. The part that exists beyond the mechanics of the formula and enters the territory of systemic urgency. In its February 2026 Budget and Economic Outlook, the Congressional Budget Office projected that the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund will be exhausted by fiscal year 2032. That is 6 years away. 6 years. And that projection is not a fringe estimate from a political advocacy group. It comes from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the same institution that analyzes every major piece of legislation for its fiscal impact. The most recent Social Security Trustees report from June 2025 projects trust fund depletion in 2033, but the CBO's February 2026 update moved that date to 2032, 1 year earlier than the prior CBO estimate and 2 years earlier than the 2024 projection. The shift is due to inflation and higher projected cost of living adjustments drawing down the fund faster. Take a moment to absorb that. The fund is being depleted faster than previously projected, not because the government miscounted something or made a clerical error. It is being depleted faster because inflation is real, because COLA adjustments are eating through reserves at an accelerating pace, and because the demographic reality of an aging population is hitting the system with a force that has been visible in actuarial projections for decades, but has never triggered the kind of legislative response that would actually address it. And what happens when the trust fund is depleted? At the point of OASI trust fund depletion, continuing program income would be sufficient to pay 77% of total scheduled benefits, a 23% across-the-board reduction for every beneficiary, regardless of need or contribution history. Read that carefully. Regardless of need, regardless of contribution history. It does not matter if you paid into the system for 40 years. It does not matter if Social Security is your primary source of income. It does not matter if you're 72 years old and have no ability to re-enter the workforce. If the trust fund runs dry and Congress does nothing, the cut comes for everyone equally. According to the SSA's April 2026 monthly statistical snapshot, the average Social Security retirement benefit was $2,181 per month as of April 2026. A 23% reduction would cut that by roughly $479 per month. That is $479 less every single month. That is $5,948 less every single year. For someone living on a fixed income, that is not an inconvenience. That is a crisis. That is the difference between covering prescription medications and going without them. That is the difference between keeping the heat on in winter and making impossible choices. And yet, this information, this trajectory, this very specific and very near-term threat is not what most people are discussing when they sit down to figure out when to file for Social Security. Think about what that means for the claiming decision you are about to make. There is a pervasive fear driving millions of Americans to claim Social Security benefits early, at 62, driven by the logic that if the system is going to cut benefits or collapse, better to get what you can while the getting is good. This reasoning sounds intuitive. It feels like financial pragmatism. But it is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how the math actually works under a benefit cut scenario. A 23% haircut on a larger benefit still beats the same haircut on a smaller one. Headline anxiety is a poor reason to lock in a 30-year income decision. Here's the real calculation. Claiming at 62 means your benefit is permanently reduced compared to your primary insurance amount. Someone born in 1964 who starts benefits in 2026 will get as little as 70% of their full monthly benefit amount, calculated from their lifetime earnings history. That reduction is permanent. On the other end of the spectrum, every year you delay beyond your full retirement age, which is currently 67 for people born in 1960 or later, your benefit grows by 8% per year. Delaying from 62 to 70 increases your monthly check by about 77%, from 70% to 124% of your PIA, 77% more per month, for the rest of your life. That is not a rounding error. That is a fundamentally different retirement. Now pair that with the trust fund reality. If a 23% cut does occur in 2032, the person who claimed at 62 receives 23% less on an already reduced benefit. The person who waited until 70 receives 23% less on a benefit that is 77% larger than the early claimers. The cut hurts both people equally in percentage terms. But in raw dollar terms, the later claimer still comes out significantly ahead, month after month, year after year, for as long as they live. The fear-based logic of claiming early to outrun the trust fund problem is, from a purely mathematical standpoint, not supported by the numbers. But here's where it gets even more complicated, because the claiming decision is not just about mathematics. It is about the interaction between your AME, your bend points, your health status, your spousal situation, your other income sources, and your realistic life expectancy. And each of those variables feeds into the formula in ways that most people never fully trace through. Let us talk about the break-even point, because this is the concept that frames the entire claiming decision, and yet is almost always misapplied. When comparing claiming at 62 versus waiting until 70, the larger delay produces bigger monthly checks at 70, and the cumulative advantage of claiming early disappears between age 80 and 81. The break-even age, the point at which the higher monthly checks from delayed claiming catch up with and surpass the cumulative total from early claiming, hovers around age 80 to 81 for the comparison between 62 and 70. For many people, the break-even point falls in the late 70s or early 80s. If you expect to live beyond that point, waiting to claim may result in the maximum benefit. Now consider the life expectancy data. The U.S. male life expectancy at age 65 is approximately 83 years, and for females, it is approximately 86 years, according to SSA actuarial tables. If those numbers reflect your realistic trajectory, you will, statistically, live past the break-even age. You will be in the territory where delaying was the financially superior decision. And yet millions of Americans claim at 62, driven by anxiety, misinformation, or simply the immediate need for income, without fully internalizing that they are making a permanent, life-altering trade-off on the basis of short-term psychology rather than long-term mathematics. What most people are not seeing is that the Social Security system is not designed to punish you for working. It is designed to reward patience. But the design of the reward is buried inside a formula that is never explained in plain language on any official communication the SSA sends you. The statement you receive from the SSA shows you a projected monthly benefit at 62, at 67, and at 70. It does not show you the bend points that generated your PIA. It does not show you how many 0 years are dragging down your AIM. It does not show you the second-order effects of every year of additional work on your lifetime benefit. It gives you 3 numbers and leaves you to make a decision that will shape the financial reality of your retirement, potentially for 20 or 30 years, based on information that is simultaneously official and deeply incomplete. And there is something else entirely that almost no one is discussing in 2026, something structural, something that is quietly accelerating the timeline of the funding crisis and has been largely underreported in the mainstream conversation about Social Security solvency. The 2025 Social Security Fairness Act extended benefits to about 3 million former public sector workers, adding almost $200 billion in obligations over a decade. This legislation, signed into law in January 2025, was celebrated as a long overdue correction for workers who had been penalized by the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset, provisions that had reduced Social Security benefits for people who also received government pensions. The correction was arguably fair, but its fiscal consequence was not neutral. By extending full benefits to millions of additional recipients, the law accelerated the depletion of the trust fund by approximately a year, pushing the projected insolvency date from 2033 to 2032, in alignment with CBO projections. A policy designed to help workers ended up pulling the funding crisis closer in time for everyone. This is not an argument against the Fairness Act. It is an illustration of how interconnected the Social Security system is, how a single legislative decision reverberates through the actuarial math and changes the retirement landscape for every person currently receiving or approaching benefits. And it is a demonstration of why the conversation about Social Security cannot be reduced to simple talking points. The system is a web. Pull one thread, and the entire structure shifts. Beginning in 2027, benefit payments will outpace income, gradually depleting the trust fund's balance from $2.19 trillion this year to $384 billion in 2031 to zero in 2032. These are not speculative numbers from an alarmist source. These are projections from the Congressional Budget Office's Budget and Economic Outlook, 2026 to 2036 report, released in February of this year. The decline is steady, predictable, and accelerating. And Congress, as of this moment, has not enacted a comprehensive reform package that would change this trajectory. Now, let us talk about what a 28% cut would actually mean at the macro level, because this is where the individual story becomes a national story. A 28% cut beginning in 2032 could reduce real U.S. GDP by about 0.7% soon after trust fund depletion, a meaningful drag concentrated in the near term. Social Security is not just a personal retirement program. It is one of the largest economic engines in the American economy. Beneficiaries spend their Social Security checks. They pay rent with them, buy groceries with them, keep local businesses alive with them. A 28% reduction in payments to tens of millions of retired Americans would immediately ripple outward into consumer spending, housing markets, healthcare utilization, and the entire economic ecosystem of communities across the country where retirees make up a significant share of the population. This is not abstract macroeconomics. This is what happens when you take money out of the pockets of people who spend virtually every dollar they receive. The economic contraction begins the moment the checks shrink. And yet the political system has shown a remarkable capacity to avoid dealing with this directly. The reason is not difficult to understand. Any meaningful solution to the Social Security funding crisis involves some combination of three deeply unpopular choices: raising the payroll tax rate, raising or eliminating the earnings cap on which payroll taxes are collected, or reducing scheduled benefits for future recipients. Each of those options carries enormous political risk. Raising taxes alienates one constituency. Cutting benefits alienates another, and the urgency of a crisis that is still 6 years away tends to evaporate in the daily pressure of a legislative calendar filled with more immediate battles. So the conversation continues in the background, in actuarial reports and budget outlooks and academic papers, while the trust fund quietly drains. The real story is that the people who are closest to this decision right now, the Americans who are 58, 60, 62, 64 years old and trying to figure out when to claim, are making one of the most consequential financial decisions of their lives inside an information environment that is simultaneously saturated with opinion and deeply deficient in the kind of precise, mechanical understanding that would actually help them make an informed choice. Let us go back to the bend points one more time, because there is a dimension of this formula that is profoundly underappreciated, and it has to do with what happens just below the first bend point. Below the first bend point, each additional $100 per month of Amy adds $90 per month to your PIA. An exceptional return. If you are near but below the first bend point, even modest additional earnings or replacing zero income years in your 35-year record can have an outsized impact on your lifetime benefit. This is the stealth opportunity embedded inside the formula. For workers at the lower end of the earnings spectrum, the return on additional work, on replacing a 0 year with even modest income, is extraordinarily high at the Social Security level. 90 cents of additional monthly benefit for every dollar of additional average monthly earnings. That is a guaranteed, inflation-protected, lifetime return that no market investment can reliably match. But you can only access this opportunity if you know the formula. If you do not know where the bend points are, you cannot know whether you are sitting just below the first one, in the zone of maximum return. If you do not know that, you might walk away from work 1 year too soon and leave a lifetime of compounded benefit on the table. For workers in the middle bracket, between the first and second bend points, the calculus is different, but the principle is the same. Adding just 1 year of $50,000 in earnings eliminates 1 0 year and raises the AME by approximately $119 per month, which translates to roughly a $38 per month PIA increase before claiming age adjustments. Over 20 years of retirement, that one decision, working 1 additional year to close a gap in your earnings record, generates over $9,000 in additional lifetime benefits. The math is not complicated, but you have to know the structure of the formula to know the question to ask. And the structure of the formula is exactly what the SSA never explains to you in plain language. According to informed sources in the retirement planning community, the most common regret expressed by people who claimed Social Security early is not that they claimed early in itself. It is that they claimed early without fully understanding how their AIME was calculated, without knowing whether 0 years were dragging down their baseline, and without running the break-even math against a realistic assessment of their own health and longevity. The decision was made under time pressure, emotional stress, financial urgency, or all three at once, and the permanent consequence of that decision compounded quietly across every subsequent month of retirement. This is the hidden architecture of Social Security. Not hidden in the sense of deliberate concealment. Hidden in the sense of complexity that is never translated into the language that ordinary people need to make extraordinary decisions. The formula is public. The bend point values are published annually on the SSA website. The actuarial projections are available in congressional reports. But the synthesis of all this information into a clear, actionable picture of how the formula affects your specific situation in the context of a trust fund that is depleting faster than previously projected, in the middle of a political environment that has shown no urgency about fixing the underlying problem. That synthesis is almost never provided to the person who needs it most. And this is the moment in 2026 where the stakes are highest, because the people making claiming decisions right now are doing so with a trust fund that has approximately 6 years of full payment capacity remaining. Using current 2026 benefit levels, a 28% cut would reduce the average retired worker's monthly benefit from about $2,071 to $1,491, a loss of roughly $6,960 per year. If you claimed at 62 and are receiving a reduced benefit, a 28% cut on top of that reduction could push your monthly income to a level that is genuinely incompatible with maintaining a stable retirement. If you are 57 years old today and planning to claim at 62 in 2031, the year before the projected insolvency, you are standing at the exact intersection of every variable discussed in this script. Your AME is being calculated right now based on the years you have worked and the gaps you may have left. Your claiming age decision is approaching, and the trust fund countdown is running in the background whether or not you are watching it. What most people are not seeing is that there are things you can actually do about this. Not in the abstract, not in the hope that Congress will act, but in the specific mechanics of how your own benefit is calculated and when you choose to access it. If you have fewer than 35 years of covered earnings, working even 1 or 2 additional years before claiming does 2 things simultaneously. It eliminates 0 years from your AME calculation, raising your PIA foundation, and it moves your claiming age closer to, or potentially beyond, your full retirement age, increasing the multiplier applied to that foundation. These 2 effects are not additive. They are multiplicative. Each one amplifies the other. If you are already past 62 and have not yet claimed, you have a window. Every month you wait past your full retirement age earns you an additional delayed retirement credit. Workers may claim reduced benefits as early as age 62 or earn delayed retirement credits by waiting until age 70. The credits accumulate at a rate that translates to 8% per year beyond full retirement age, capped at age 70. After 70, the credits stop. Waiting past 70 earns you nothing additional. But between full retirement age and 70, every year of delay is an 8% permanent increase to your monthly benefit, guaranteed, inflation protected, and payable for the rest of your life. If you are still working and approaching 62, the bend point formula is the lens through which your decision should be viewed. Where does your current AME land relative to the 2 bend points? How many 0 or near 0 years are in your 35-year history? What would 1, 2, or 3 more years of work do to your AME? And how does that translate through the formula into a higher PIA? These are not rhetorical questions. They are calculations you can perform using your Social Security statement from SSA.gov and the published bend point values for your birth cohort. The formula is not your enemy, but it rewards the people who understand it and quietly penalizes the people who do not. And right now in 2026, the urgency of that understanding has never been higher. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget previously estimated, based on a 24% benefit reduction, that a typical couple aged 60 today who retires at the time of insolvency would face an $18,400 cut to their annual benefits. $18,400 a year. That is not a budget adjustment. That is a retirement crisis. For a couple that built a retirement plan around the Social Security benefits they were promised, a cut of that magnitude does not just reshape the financial picture. It reshapes everything: where they live, how they access health care, whether they can support family members who depend on them, what kind of future they can realistically envision. And Congress has not acted. Not with a comprehensive fix, not with a structural reform that changes the revenue side, adjusts the benefit formula for future recipients, or otherwise puts the trust fund on a trajectory toward long-term solvency. There are proposals circulating in both chambers. There are think tanks publishing detailed analyses with specific reform packages and projected fiscal impacts. But between the proposal and the legislation lies the most difficult terrain in American politics. The terrain where every solution creates a constituency of people who will bear its cost, and those people vote. So what happens in the scenario where Congress continues to do nothing between now and 2032? An illustrative scenario examined by the CBO finds that benefits paid to beneficiaries would be cut by 7% in 2032 and by an average of 28% per year from 2033 to 2036. It also notes that the process for cutting benefits is not outlined in federal law, and that different ways of cutting Social Security benefits to match incoming tax revenue would have different implications for the economy and budget. Read that last part carefully. The process for cutting benefits is not outlined in federal law. Nobody has legally specified how the cuts would be distributed, whether they would be uniform across all recipients or targeted at certain groups, whether there would be exemptions for the lowest earners, or whether the system would simply pay a proportional share of every check to every beneficiary simultaneously. The ambiguity is not reassuring. It means that if Congress fails to act and insolvency arrives, the mechanism of the cut itself becomes a political and legal crisis on top of the fiscal one. This is the terrain that Americans making Social Security decisions in 2026 are navigating. Not a simple question of when to file, not a straightforward calculation of benefit amounts. A genuinely complex intersection of formula mechanics, demographic pressures, legislative uncertainty, individual health and longevity variables, and a trust fund that is, by every serious projection currently available, on track to require some form of painful adjustment within the next decade. The bend points are not just numbers in a formula, they are the architecture of a promise. The promise that workers who contributed to the system for decades would receive a benefit calibrated to their earnings history, protected against inflation and reliable for life. That promise is not broken yet, but the structural pressures bearing down on it are real, documented, and accelerating. And the people who are best positioned to navigate what comes next are the ones who understand, precisely and mechanically, how the promise was calculated in the first place. Because here is what nobody tells you at the end of this story. The formula gives you leverage if you use it intelligently. The bend points reveal where the highest return on additional work actually is. The 35-year rule reveals exactly how much your gaps in coverage are costing you. The delayed retirement credits reveal a guaranteed return on patients that the private market cannot match. And the trust fund projections, alarming as they are, do not change the underlying math. A 23 or 28% cut on a larger benefit is still better than the same cut on a smaller one. The question is not whether the system is under pressure. It is. The question is not whether Congress will eventually have to act. It will, because the alternative is a fiscal and political catastrophe that no administration wants to own. The question is whether you, sitting with your own earnings history and your own claiming decision on the horizon, will make that decision with the full weight of the formula in your understanding, or whether you will let the anxiety of the moment, the fear of a collapsing system, the seductive simplicity of claiming early and taking whatever you can get, make the decision for you. The bend point you were never told about is the line in the formula where the government quietly changes the rate at which it values your work. Below it, you're protected at 90%. Above it, you are in the 32% zone. And the distance between where your AME lands and where those bend points sit is the distance between the retirement you assumed you would have and the retirement you will actually receive. There are decisions being made right now by people who are close to retirement and believe they understand how Social Security works that will lock in benefit levels for the next 20 or 30 years. Some of those decisions are the right ones, grounded in real information and genuine understanding of the formula, the trust fund, the break-even math, and the specific circumstances of individual health and finances. But a significant number of those decisions are being made in the dark, driven by partial information, political fear, and the false comfort of a projected benefit number on a government website that does not tell you how that number was built or what you could do to change it. The system is under pressure. The clock is running. And the formula, with its 2 bend points and its 3 replacement rates and its 35-year averaging window and its annual COLA adjustments, is doing its work quietly in the background, producing numbers that will define the financial reality of retirement for millions of Americans who never had the chance to truly understand what was being calculated on their behalf. So before you file, before you accept the number on the screen, before you let fear or urgency or someone else's timeline dictate the single most permanent financial decision of your retirement years, you need to know exactly where your Amy lands relative to those two numbers, 286 and 7749. You need to know how many 0 years are buried in your 35-year calculation and what replacing even one of them would do to your PIA. You need to know your real break-even age, calculated against your actual health history and your family's longevity patterns, not an industry average. And you need to understand that a trust fund under pressure is a political problem that Congress has not solved yet, but that reality does not change the mathematics of your individual formula. The number they never told you about is not hiding. It is published on the SSA website every single year. But knowing it exists, knowing what it does, and knowing how to use that knowledge to make a better decision, that is what separates the people who retire on their own terms from the people who spend the last chapter of their working lives wondering what they missed. And right now in 2026, with 6 years until the projected trust fund insolvency date, with Ben points locked in for a generation of workers who have never heard the term, with Congress watching the clock and debating in the background, the window to make that decision with clear eyes is still open. But windows close, clocks run, and the formula does not wait. What will you do with the number before it becomes the only number you have left?